This was the moment my neighbor, Karen, completely snapped. She had parked her car to block my driveway, was live streaming me, and screaming that I was a psychopath who was imprisoning the entire neighborhood. All because I chose to lock a gate on my own private property. But how did a simple security measure lead to a police standoff and a teenager having a panic attack? This is the full story. My name is Andrew, and my life, up until about 2 years ago, was a predictable rhythm of code, coffee, and quiet evenings. As a software engineer who primarily works from home, my environment is everything. It's my office, my sanctuary, and my retreat from the digital noise I spend my days navigating. After years of living in apartments where the sound of my upstairs neighbor's footsteps was the soundtrack to my life, I decided it was time to invest in silence. I wanted a place where the only alerts I heard were from my own systems, not someone else's life bleeding through the walls. I spent months searching for the perfect property, a place that balanced suburban tranquility with reasonable access to the city. I finally found it at the end of a serene cul-de-sac. The house itself was beautiful, a modern build with large windows that overlooked a sprawling backyard, but the real selling point was its unique position. The realtor made a point of emphasizing the private driveway with a security gate. The property was a flag lot, which meant it was set back from the main street, connected by a long, exclusive driveway. This strip of land, which extended all the way to the main road, was a buffer against the world. It promised unparalleled privacy. The property came with a binder thick with detailed surveys, plat maps, and legal documents, all of which clearly delineated my property lines. The previous owner, retired pilot who valued his security, had installed the formidable-looking metal gate. When I moved in, the first few months were idyllic. The neighborhood was everything I had hoped for, peaceful, clean, and orderly. The neighbors I met were pleasant enough, offering polite waves and brief chats about the weather when I'd check the mail. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, seemed benign. Their rules were standard fare: keep your lawn mowed, don't paint your house an outlandish color, and put your trash bins away promptly. I paid my monthly dues without complaint and enjoyed the quiet I had so desperately craved. The gate at the end of my long driveway had been left open by the previous owner, likely to make the moving process easier for me and for showing the house before that. In the initial whirlwind of unpacking and settling in, I didn't give it a second thought. It was just a feature I'd get around to using eventually. I was more focused on setting up my home office and enjoying the simple pleasure of hearing nothing but the birds outside my window. That piece, however, turned out to be a temporary state of grace. For 6 months, I didn't think anything of it. Then I realized I wasn't just owning a house. I was running an unpaid public highway. My private driveway had become the neighborhood's favorite shortcut. At first, it was just a car or two a day. But as word got around, the traffic increased exponentially. It became a steady stream, especially during morning and evening rush hours. People were using it to bypass a traffic light on the main road, shaving maybe a minute or two off their commute. I started to notice tire tracks on the edge of my lawn and the occasional fast food wrapper near the gate. The constant parade of cars shattered the very peace I had paid a premium for. My private sanctuary had become a public convenience. I knew I had to address it, but I wanted to be neighborly. I assumed it was an honest mistake. So, I started with a gentle approach. When I'd see a neighbor cutting through, I'd politely go out and mention that the driveway was actually private property. Most people were genuinely surprised and apologetic. "Oh, I had no idea." The last guy never said a thing. "So sorry about that," was the common refrain, and they would immediately stop using it. But a few reacted with a flash of annoyance, a flicker of entitlement in their eyes as if I were rescinding a public right rather than asserting a private one. They'd offer a curt nod and speed off, and I had a feeling I'd see them again. One neighbor, however, took my polite request not as a clarification, but as a personal declaration of war. That neighbor was Karen. Karen lived 3 houses down, in a pristine 2-story colonial that always had perfectly manicured flower beds. She was, for all intents and purposes, the queen of the cul-de-sac. She had lived there for over 15 years, served as the secretary on the HOA board, and carried herself with an air of unshakable authority. She was the type of person who believed her longevity in the neighborhood granted her a special class of citizenship. She drove a gleaming white BMW SUV, had impeccably coiffed blonde hair, and a teenage daughter, Ashley, who always seemed to be trailing in her mother's wake with a downcast expression. The first direct confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning. I was deep in concentration, debugging a tricky piece of code, when the sound of car doors slamming just outside my office window jolted me from my work. I glanced out to see Karen's BMW parked directly in front of my garage, blocking me in. She and Ashley were getting out. My first thought was that there must be some kind of emergency. I went outside, a concerned look on my face, ready to offer help. But the expression on Karen's face wasn't one of distress. It was one of barely contained irritation. "Andrew," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of any pleasantries, "we need to talk about this gate situation." She gestured vaguely toward the end of the driveway. "Ashley has been late to school twice this week. She can't get through your driveway quickly enough in the mornings. This shortcut saves us at least 5 minutes, and frankly, it's been a community courtesy for years. The previous owner never had a problem with it." I was taken aback by her confrontational tone. I calmly explained, "I understand the convenience, Karen, but the survey documents that came with the house confirm this is all private property. I'm planning to start keeping the gate closed for security. I have a lot of expensive equipment for my work, and I need to be careful." Karen's face tightened. It was as if I'd told her I was planning to build a moat. "Just because you're new here doesn't mean you can just change things that have worked for everyone else for over a decade," she snapped. "This community has established patterns. You're being selfish and antisocial. You're disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood." Ashley, who was standing behind her mother, looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She stared at her shoes, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. But Karen was just warming up. She informed me, in no uncertain terms, that she would be bringing this issue up at the next HOA meeting. She was certain, she said, that the board would agree that community harmony was far more important than one person's so-called property rights. She even had the audacity to suggest that my actions would negatively affect property values. The conversation ended with her spinning on her heel, getting back in her car and speeding away, not through my driveway, but with a pointed, angry squeal of tires as she took the long way around. I was left standing there, baffled. A simple request had somehow been twisted into an attack on the very fabric of the community. Over the next few weeks, Karen launched a grassroots political campaign against me. I'd see her holding court in driveways and on sidewalks, her arms waving animatedly as she pointed toward my house. She was gathering her troops, framing me as the villainous newcomer disrupting their way of life. Some neighbors seemed to buy into her narrative, while others would offer me a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile, clearly wanting no part in the drama. The tension was palpable. Then, the official-looking envelope arrived. It was a formal letter from the HOA, signed by Karen as board secretary, requesting my presence at the next monthly meeting to discuss a community access issue. It mentioned that several residents had voiced concerns. I knew this was her doing entirely. I spent the weekend preparing as if for a legal battle. I pored over my property survey, my deed, and local property laws. Every document, every statute confirmed my position. The driveway and the gate were unequivocally mine. I even found an old email from the previous owner's realtor mentioning that the gate had been installed specifically to stop neighbors from cutting through, but was left open during the sale to avoid precisely this kind of conflict. He had taken the path of least resistance. I was determined not to. The HOA meeting was held in the small, sterile community center. The moment I walked in, I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me. The turnout was unusually high, about 20 residents, most of whom I didn't recognize. Karen had successfully rallied her base. She sat at the front table with the other board members, a smug, confident look on her face. She kicked off the discussion by presenting a highly emotional, fact-free case for the community's perspective. She spoke of tradition, of a decade-long understanding that had fostered neighborhood convenience and cohesion. She painted a grim picture of what would happen if the shortcut were closed: increased traffic, longer commutes for hardworking parents, and a tear in the social fabric of their tight-knit community. When my turn came, I stuck to the facts. I calmly laid out my legal documents on the table and explained the situation from a property rights perspective. I reiterated my security concerns and made it clear that while I wanted to be a good neighbor, I had never consented to my property being used as a public thoroughfare. I'm willing to discuss reasonable accommodations, I offered, but unrestricted, uncompensated use of my private land isn't sustainable. The discussion that followed was tense. A few of Karen's allies spoke up, sharing anecdotes about how the shortcut had saved them during a forgotten lunchbox emergency or a rush to a soccer game. They were treating convenience as if it were a legally protected right. Then, to my surprise, a voice of reason emerged. My neighbor from across the street, a retired engineer named David, spoke up. "I think we're forgetting something fundamental here," he said, his voice calm and steady. "This is Andrea's property. We don't have a right to it just because it's convenient. I've noticed more traffic and even trash near that gate lately. Maybe this informal arrangement isn't working as well as Karen suggests." The meeting ended without a formal resolution. The board was deadlocked. But Karen wasn't deterred. She announced that the board would research potential deed restrictions or prescriptive easements that might force my hand. She then encouraged everyone present to document any and all inconveniences caused by my selfish decision to close the gate. I thought the meeting would be the end of it, but I was wrong. So, what does a person like Karen do when she can't get her way through official channels? She escalates. I decided on a compromise. I began keeping the gate closed during my work hours, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but left it open in the evenings and on weekends. It was a solution that protected my work environment while still allowing for some access. But for Karen, this wasn't a compromise, it was a provocation. Her response was to begin a campaign of petty harassment. She would time her departures to coincide with peak traffic, parking her BMW directly in front of my closed gate, forcing a line of cars to wait behind her as she made a grand, theatrical show of sighing, checking her watch, and shaking her head in disgust at the delay my gate was causing. I had the law on my side, but Karen had a new weapon, psychological warfare, and her next move was something I never could have predicted. She began what I can only describe as a meticulous documentation campaign. I'd catch her from my window, standing across the street with a clipboard, taking photos of my gate from different angles. She started timing her alternate route with a stopwatch, as if preparing evidence for a Supreme Court case. David later told me she had created a shared spreadsheet titled Inconvenience Incidents, where she and her supporters logged every perceived hardship. Entries included things like lost 47 seconds due to gate closure, causing emotional distress, and forced to brake suddenly on main road, nearly spilling latte. It was absurd, but it was also unsettling. The breaking point, the moment this went from a neighborhood squabble to outright harassment, came on a Friday morning. I was on a crucial video conference with international clients, presenting a major project update. Suddenly, a car horn began blaring relentlessly right outside my window. I tried to ignore it, apologizing to my clients for the background noise, but it was impossible. The honking was continuous, angry, and demanding. I looked out the window and saw Karen's white BMW, positioned squarely in front of my gate. She was laying on the horn, a furious expression on her face. While Karen laid on the horn, I saw her daughter, Ashley, in the passenger seat. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was shrinking, trying to disappear into the leather upholstery. In that moment, I wasn't just angry for myself, I felt a pang of sadness for this kid, trapped in her mother's war. I had to excuse myself from the meeting, my face burning with frustration. I walked outside and Karen rolled down her window. "You are making Ashley late for her college interview," she screamed. "Your selfishness is going to ruin her entire future." "Karen, I am in the middle of a business meeting," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Please stop honking and just use the main road." Her response was to start honking even more furiously, shouting that I had no right to block a community road. At that point, Ashley couldn't take it anymore. She got out of the car and started walking briskly toward the main road, her head down. Karen, enraged at her daughter's defiance, jumped out of the car, leaving it running and blocking my driveway, and started chasing after Ashley, screaming at her down the street. That was it. This was no longer a disagreement. It was harassment, and it was affecting my livelihood and her own family. That weekend, I consulted with a property lawyer. He confirmed I was on solid legal ground and advised me to document everything. His key recommendation was to install security cameras. Let her perform for an audience, he said. The following Monday, a security team installed high-definition cameras covering my entire driveway and gate. I also had them put up clear, professional signs stating, "Private property." 24-hour video surveillance in use. Finally, I had the gate mechanism upgraded with a remote and an intercom system. My fortress was now complete. Karen's reaction was immediate. That evening, she was at my door, brandishing a petition allegedly signed by dozens of neighbors, demanding I remove the invasive cameras and the eyesore of a gate. She claimed the surveillance was a violation of privacy and was tanking everyone's property values. I politely refused and explained the security measures were a direct result of her continued harassment. She stormed off, threatening to file complaints with the city and vowing to make me regret ever moving into her neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, Karen's behavior grew more bizarre. She began what I called her gate testing expeditions. She would drive up, stop inches from the gate, and just sit there, sometimes for 20 minutes, staring at my house. When I didn't respond, she'd drive off in a huff. My neighbor David informed me she had started a private Facebook group, Neighborhood Access Coalition, where she posted her distorted version of events. She shared photos of my new cameras, calling me a paranoid recluse and whipping her followers into a frenzy of indignation. The worst part wasn't the banners or the news segment. It was seeing Ashley's face every time Karen dragged her along. The stress was written all over her. This was no longer about a gate. It was about the collateral damage of a one-sided feud. Ashley looked trapped, a prisoner in her mother's obsessive crusade. I started to feel that I was an unwilling participant in a deeply dysfunctional family drama. Then came the formal complaints. I received a call from the city planning office. They had received multiple anonymous complaints, which I knew were from Karen about an unpermitted gate installation and disruption of traffic patterns. I calmly emailed them copies of my building permits, the property survey, and a brief summary of the situation. The city official I spoke with sounded weary. She understood this was a neighbor dispute, not a zoning violation. She confirmed I was within my rights and mentioned they had been receiving an unusual number of calls about my property. She suggested mediation. I agreed instantly, but when the city contacted Karen, she refused, insisting that only enforcement action against me would suffice. Her refusal made it clear to the city who the unreasonable party was. For a few weeks, it was quiet, eerily quiet. I started to hope it was over. But with Karen, the silence was never a surrender. It was just her reloading. And her final plan involved bringing a news crew to my front door. One morning, I woke up to find a professionally made banner zip-tied to my gate. In bold letters, it read, "Community access is a right, not a privilege." It even had a website address for her coalition. I took a picture for my evidence file, removed the banner, and felt a knot of dread in my stomach. This was a new level of escalation. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was a reporter from a local news station. Karen had fed them a story, positioning herself as a grassroots community advocate fighting a wealthy, antisocial newcomer who was walling off the neighborhood. I politely declined to comment, stating it was a private property matter. That evening, I watched myself be villainized on the 10 o'clock news. There was Karen, looking earnest and concerned, talking about community spirit. They showed dramatic, shaky cam footage of my gate and my security cameras. They interviewed a few of her allies, who spoke of the hardships they now faced. My refusal to comment was framed as arrogance. The story painted me as the bad guy, a heartless recluse destroying a neighborhood's harmony. The news report emboldened Karen. The next few days saw an increase in gate tourism. Cars I didn't recognize would drive by slowly, their occupants pointing and taking pictures. It felt like I was an exhibit in a zoo. The harassment was no longer just from Karen. It was from strangers she had incited. I began to seriously question if it was all worth it. Maybe I should just move. The situation finally reached its inevitable, explosive climax on a Saturday morning in mid-December. I was heading out to do some holiday shopping. As I got into my car, I saw Karen's BMW parked squarely in front of my gate, completely blocking my exit. This was no longer a protest, it was a physical blockade. I walked over to her car. She and Ashley were inside, windows rolled up. I knocked on the driver's side window. She rolled it down a crack. "I am exercising my right to peaceful protest on public property," she said, a smug smile on her face. Her phone was propped up on the dashboard, clearly recording. "Karen, you're on my private driveway, and you are legally blocking me in," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Move your car now, or I am calling the police." She laughed. "Go ahead. Let's see who they believe. A longtime community member or a troublemaker like you. This will be great for the next news story." I went back inside and dialed the non-emergency police line. I explained that a neighbor was trespassing and using her vehicle to imprison me on my own property. As I waited, I watched from my window as Karen, on her phone, summoned her supporters. Within 15 minutes, 3 more cars had arrived, and a small crowd had gathered around her BMW, offering her words of encouragement. It was a full-blown spectacle. When the police officer's cruiser pulled up, he had to navigate a small mob scene. I went out to meet him, armed with my binder of documents, the survey, photos of the harassment, a log of every incident. I gave him the 2-minute summary. He listened patiently, then walked over to Karen. He calmly explained that regardless of past use, she was on private property and was illegally blocking a driveway. He told her to move her vehicle immediately. Karen argued, launching into her speech about community rights and my bullying tactics. She demanded he investigate her claims of a prescriptive easement before taking any action. The officer was firm. "Ma'am, that's a civil matter. Right now, this is a trespassing issue. You need to move your car now, or I will have you towed and you will be ticketed." At this point, Ashley got out of the car. She looked like she was about to be sick. She started walking away toward one of the other cars. "Ashley, get back in this car," Karen shrieked. "We are not finished making our point." Ashley spun around, her face a mask of anguish and fury. In a voice loud enough for the entire crowd and the officer to hear, she yelled, "No. This has gone too far. I am so embarrassed. I am tired of being dragged into this crazy fight that's making our whole family look insane. I want no part of this." Her daughter's public denunciation was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Karen's mind seemed to snap. The carefully constructed facade of the concerned community advocate crumbled, revealing the raw, frantic rage beneath. She started screaming, not just at Ashley, but at the police officer and at me. That's when the words I shared at the very beginning came pouring out in a torrent of pure, undiluted fury. "You have no right to lock us out of our neighborhood. This is public property. I'm calling the police right now. My daughter is having a panic attack because of you." She was waving her phone around, claiming she was recording everything while screaming that she was going to sue me, the police, the entire city. She called me a psychopath who was trying to imprison them. Ashley stood about 20 feet away, tears streaming down her face, utterly mortified. The officer, now realizing he was dealing with a completely irrational person, spoke into his radio, likely calling for backup. He finally told Karen in a very stern voice that if she did not get in her car and leave immediately, she would be arrested for trespassing, harassment, and disturbing the peace. The threat of arrest finally seemed to penetrate her rage. The fight went out of her. She muttered threats under her breath, got into her BMW, and slowly, grudgingly moved it. Her supporters, seeing their leader defeated, quickly and silently dispersed, avoiding my gaze as they scurried back to their cars. After everyone was gone, the officer stayed and spoke with me. He confirmed I had been well within my rights and had handled the situation with remarkable patience. He gave me a card with the official report number, noting that her behavior had crossed well into criminal harassment territory. He advised me to call 911 immediately if she ever set foot on my property again. The aftermath was swift. The story of Karen's public meltdown spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within days, several neighbors, including some who had signed her petition, came to my door to apologize. Witnessing her unhinged behavior firsthand had shattered her credibility. David told me the consensus was now that Karen was the problem, not me. People were more concerned about her mental state and the effect her obsession was having on Ashley. The HOA sent a formal letter, signed by the president, acknowledging my right to control access to my property and stating the board now considered the matter closed. Karen's signature was conspicuously absent. She seemed to vanish from public life. Her car no longer cruised by my gate. The Facebook group was deleted. She had lost her war, and with it, her standing in the community she claimed to represent. I saw Ashley a few times after that. She would give me a small, polite wave. It was a silent acknowledgement, a truce. I hoped that she and her family could heal from the conflict her mother had manufactured. In the end, the whole ordeal, as stressful as it was, had a surprisingly positive effect on the neighborhood. It served as a stark lesson on the importance of boundaries and respecting property rights. It forced people to consider the line between community convenience and individual rights. It taught me invaluable lessons as well. I learned that standing your ground calmly and legally is the most powerful response to irrational aggression. Documenting everything is not paranoia, it's protection. The security cameras were the best investment I ever made, providing indisputable proof that countered Karen's narrative at every turn. I also learned the value of allies. David's willingness to speak up at that first meeting made a huge difference. It showed me I wasn't entirely alone. The experience reinforced that while most conflicts can be solved with reasonable discussion, some people are immune to reason. For them, the only language they understand is firm, legally backed boundaries. My gate remains closed most of the time now. The peace and quiet I originally sought has finally been restored. My property rights and the fundamental principle that they are not subject to a popular vote by my neighbors have been firmly established. And I hope my story can serve as a guide for anyone else who finds themselves in a battle against an unreasonable neighbor who confuses their convenience with your obligation.